The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. At first, the scientists at the Global Space Communications Center thought it was a glitch. Strange patterns filled their screens, too ordered to be random noise, too complex to be natural. "Run it again," ordered Director Marcus, rubbing his tired eyes. For 3 years, his team had searched the stars for signs of intelligent life. Now something had found them instead. After 6 hours of analysis, the computers finally translated the alien language. The message was simple: prepare for evaluation. 2 days later, they came. Massive ships appeared in Earth's orbit, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian. The world watched in stunned silence as smaller vessels descended through the atmosphere, landing in fields outside major cities. The aliens called themselves the Vex. Tall, 6-limbed creatures with iridescent scales and 3 pairs of compound eyes. They moved with fluid grace despite Earth's gravity, which they complained was uncomfortably heavy. At the United Nations emergency session, the Vex ambassador spoke through a translation device. "We have classified your world as a Class 5 Deathworld," the mechanical voice announced. "Excessive gravity, toxic oxygen levels, dangerous temperature fluctuations, hostile organisms everywhere." The ambassador's eye stalks swiveled around the room. "Yet somehow your soft species survives here. Fascinating, but irrelevant. Your primitive civilization now has the honor of joining the Vex Empire." President Taylor stood. "We welcome peaceful contact with your civilization, but Earth is a sovereign planet. We have no interest in becoming part of any empire." The Vex ambassador's scales flashed in patterns that the translation device couldn't interpret. "How amusing. You misunderstand. This is not a negotiation." Back on their command ship, the Vex leaders studied Earth's transmissions. They watched humans playing sports, fighting wars, building cities, and surviving in every environment from frozen mountains to scorching deserts. "These creatures seem remarkably durable for soft-bodied organisms," noted Core, the military analyst. "And their technological growth rate over just a century is concerning." High Commander Drex dismissed these concerns with a flick of his primary limbs. "Every primitive species looks impressive until they face true power. Their weapons are toys compared to ours. But they've survived global wars, plagues, and countless natural disasters," Core insisted. "A species that evolves on a Deathworld." "Enough," Drex interrupted. "They are backward creatures who still use combustion engines and projectile weapons. Their strongest materials would crumble under our weakest energy beams." The Vex ultimatum was delivered to every government on Earth simultaneously: surrender within 1 planetary rotation, or face annihilation. Inside the Pentagon's crisis room, General Alex Rivera studied the alien ships on the monitors. "They're positioning for a first strike," he reported, "targeting our major cities and military installations." President Taylor looked at the grim faces around the table. "Options. We've analyzed their communication patterns," said Dr. West, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Their command structure is rigid, hierarchical. They expect immediate compliance and seem confused by our distributed decision-making." Captain James Reed nodded. "That's something we can use. They think we're weak because we're soft. They don't understand what it means to evolve on Earth." As the deadline approached, humans around the world prepared as they always had when facing extinction. Some prayed, some partied, some planned, and some fought. The Vex watched with cold calculation, confident in their superiority, unaware they had just made the greatest miscalculation in their empire's history. They had declared war on a Deathworld. When the Vex attack began, it looked like the end of human civilization. Energy beams sliced through skyscrapers as if they were paper. Landing craft deployed troops in major cities around the world. News feeds showed alien walkers stomping through city streets, their weapons turning cars into molten puddles. "This is the price of defiance," announced the Vex commander through all Earth broadcasting systems. "Surrender now, and we will be merciful." But something unexpected happened. The Vex weapons, designed for the vacuum of space and the thin atmospheres of conquered worlds, lost efficiency in Earth's dense air. The moisture and dust particles scattered their energy beams, reducing their range and power by nearly 40%. And humans didn't break. They didn't surrender. They fought back. In London, subway workers led thousands to safety through underground tunnels the Vex didn't know existed. In Mumbai, people used the crowded streets and narrow alleys to ambush alien patrols. In Rio, police and civilians worked together to trap a Vex walker between buildings, bringing it down with construction equipment. At the Pentagon's Underground Command Center, Captain James Reed watched the incoming reports with growing hope. "The Vex are struggling with our atmosphere," reported a scientist, pointing to thermal readings. "Their suits are overheating." They expected to walk in, take minimal losses, and have us surrender by now. General Rivera nodded. "Then we make them sweat even more. All units, engage using environmental tactics." Around the world, humanity's defenders adapted. In desert regions, soldiers used dust storms to blind Vex sensors. In tropical areas, the heat and humidity made Vex troops sluggish. And everywhere, the soft creatures the Vex had dismissed proved remarkably hard to kill. Aboard the Vex command ship, High Commander Drex watched in growing anger as more red alerts appeared on the tactical display. "Impossible. Their primitive weapons shouldn't be able to damage our armor," he hissed, scales flashing with rage patterns. Kor, the military analyst, studied the battle data. "Their projectile weapons are simple but effective. High-velocity metal fragments don't need complex technology to penetrate barriers, and their explosive compounds are surprisingly powerful." "It's the gravity," said another officer. "These humans developed under crushing gravity. Their muscles and projectile weapons have greater force than we calculated." A subordinate approached nervously. "Commander, forward base 3 reports they are retreating." "What?" Drex's voice made the bridge crew flinch. "No Vex force retreats without direct orders. Base 3 reports the humans used their own burning buildings as weapons. They directed the flames toward our positions. Many troops couldn't maintain suit integrity in the extreme heat. On Earth, Captain Reed coordinated with resistance cells worldwide. Every failed Vex attack provided valuable intelligence. Every captured piece of alien technology was rushed to research labs. Humans learned quickly. They had to. "They're pulling back," Reed told President Taylor during an emergency video call. The president was in a hardened bunker, her face lit by emergency lights. "Not retreating completely, but regrouping. We hurt them." "How bad are our losses?" asked Taylor. Reed's expression darkened. "Bad. Major cities worldwide are damaged. Millions of casualties. But we're still in the fight, and the Vex know it now." In a bombed-out building that once housed a university library, Dr. West carefully examined a damaged Vex combat suit with a team of scientists. "Look at these readings," she said. "Their biology is completely different from ours. And these artificial systems, they're vulnerable to our environment in ways they never expected." As night fell across a wounded Earth, the Vex ships glowed in the sky, a reminder that the war had only begun. But humans looked up with something new alongside their fear: defiance. The Vex had expected a quick victory. Instead, they had awakened a planet of survivors. Kor stood alone in the Vex analysis chamber, surrounded by holographic displays of human biology. What had started as a routine study of the enemy had become an obsession. Something about these creatures didn't make sense. "Play combat footage, sequence 12B again," Kor commanded. The display showed a human soldier trapped under debris. By all Vex understanding, the human's leg was clearly broken. Yet somehow, the soldier managed to drag himself and a wounded comrade to safety, all while returning fire. Pause. Enhanced biometric readings. The data showed impossible levels of stress hormones and neural activity. The human should have been in shock, incapacitated by pain. Instead, its body had adapted, temporarily shutting down non-essential functions to focus on survival. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them at every turn, Core muttered, and it made them incredibly resilient. A chime indicated an incoming message from High Commander Drex. Your preliminary report, Analyst Core. Commander, I believe we have severely underestimated the humans, Core replied. Their adaptability factor exceeds anything in our database. They're not just surviving our attacks. They are learning from them. Drex's eye stalks twitched with irritation. Your admiration for these primitives borders on treason, Analyst. Focus on finding weaknesses, not strengths. Meanwhile on Earth, in a makeshift lab established in an abandoned mineshaft, Dr. Eleanor West worked frantically. Around her, a team of scientists and engineers examined pieces of captured Vex technology. Look at this, Dr. West said, pointing to a microscope display. Their metals aren't metals at all. They're grown, not forged. Some kind of crystalline biological hybrid. A young engineer named Park held up a damaged Vex weapon. I figured out how the power coupling works. It's actually simple once you understand their basics mathematics. Dr. West looked surprised. You've reverse engineered it already. Park nodded. Humans have been taking apart enemies' weapons and figuring out how they work since the first caveman picked up another tribe's spear. It's what we do. Across the world, similar breakthroughs were happening. Humans didn't just fight the Vex. They studied them, learned from them, and began to understand them. But the Vex were having unexpected problems of their own. Their troops were falling ill with mysterious ailments. Their equipment malfunctioned in Earth's varying climates. Even their ships showed signs of contamination. Back in the command ship, a medical officer reported to Drex. Something in this planet's biosphere is affecting our systems. Microorganisms are everywhere, in the air, the water, the soil. Our troops' protective measures are failing. How is this possible? Demanded Drex. We've conquered worlds with far more extreme conditions, but never one with such biodiversity, the officer explained. Earth has millions of different species, all competing, all evolving. Our systems were designed to counter specific threats, not this chaotic ecosystem. On the battlefield, the tide was slowly turning. Captain Reed, now coordinating global resistance from a mobile command center, received reports of Vex troops retreating from several areas. They're pulling back from the rainforests completely, a Brazilian commander reported. Our scouts found abandoned positions with Vex equipment covered in mold. It's eating through their technology. Reed smiled grimly. Earth is fighting with us. Send samples of that mold to Dr. West immediately. In her lab, Dr. West made another discovery. The Vex have no concept of symbiosis, she explained to Reed during their encrypted call. Their biology is based on dominance, not cooperation. They've never encountered a world where organisms evolve to work together. Can we use that? Asked Reed. We already are, Dr. West replied, her eyes bright with discovery. Every human carries billions of microorganisms that help us survive. To the Vex, that's not just alien, it's incomprehensible. As weeks passed, the humans didn't just survive, they adapted. And in doing so, they revealed the Vex's greatest weakness, their inability to understand that on a Deathworld, adaptability wasn't just useful, it was essential. Today we end this primitive resistance, announced Sub-Commander Vrek to his battle unit. We will show these humans the true might of Vex ground forces. The Vex had analyzed their failures and developed a new strategy. Their energy weapons were less effective in Earth's atmosphere, so they would rely on physical strength and superior armor. The assault pods crashed down in coordinated strikes across 5 continents. Heavily armored Vex troops marched out, each standing nearly 8 feet tall, their exoskeletons gleaming. By Vex calculations, each soldier should be equal to 10 humans in strength. They were wrong. In the Rocky Mountains, Vex troops found themselves struggling to climb slopes that local rangers moved across with ease. Their breathing apparatus, designed for thin atmospheres, worked poorly in the high altitude. Their large frames, an advantage on lower gravity worlds, became a liability on the narrow mountain paths. "They're top-heavy," observed Lieutenant Fisher, watching through binoculars from a hidden position. "And they hate the cold." She keyed her radio. "All units, Operation Avalanche is a go." Carefully placed explosive charges triggered landslides above Vex positions. The aliens, used to fighting on flat, cleared battlefields, had no defense against thousands of tons of rock and snow. Those that survived found themselves hunted by small teams of mountain warfare specialists who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. In the Amazon rainforest, the Vex advanced in tight formation, cutting down trees with energy blades to create clear lines of fire. They didn't understand that the jungle itself was alive with threats. "They're making so much noise," whispered Corporal Dias to his squad. "They might as well be broadcasting their position." His team had lived in these forests their entire lives. They knew how to move silently, how to use the dense vegetation for cover, when to be still and when to strike. The Vex discovered too late that their sensors couldn't penetrate the thick canopy. Their communication signals bounced and scattered. Their heavy armor sank in the mud and snagged on vines, and the humans seemed to materialize from nowhere, striking with devastating precision before melting back into the green shadows. Across the African savanna, Vex Walker units moved in what they believed was an unstoppable formation. Their tactical computers had calculated optimal firing patterns to eliminate any opposition, but they hadn't accounted for the terrain. The hidden gullies, the tall grass that concealed fighters, the watering holes where their heavy machines bogged down. Most critically, they hadn't accounted for human ingenuity. Local defenders used burning grass to create smoke screens. They lured Vex units into narrow passes where they couldn't maneuver. They used knowledge passed down through generations about how to survive in one of Earth's most challenging environments. On the Vex command ship, reports of failures flooded in from all fronts. "This makes no sense," raged Drex, smashing a control panel with his primary limb. "We outnumber them. Our technology is superior. Our warriors are stronger." Kor studied the battle maps thoughtfully. "Commander, the humans aren't fighting us directly. They're using their environment as a weapon. And they know that environment intimately. They evolved in it. A true warrior adapts to any battlefield." Drex snapped. "That's just it, sir," Kor replied quietly. "The humans didn't adapt to this battlefield. They were shaped by it. For millions of years, Earth tried to kill them, and those who survived passed on their traits. They're not just fighting us. They're fighting alongside their world." In his mobile command center, Captain Reed reviewed the global situation. The Vex ground offensive had faltered everywhere. Their rigid tactics failed against human guerrilla warfare. Their centralized command structure couldn't match the flexibility of local units making decisions based on conditions on the ground. They thought their physical strength would give them the advantage, Reed told his officers. But they don't understand. Humans don't just survive on a Deathworld. We master it. Around the world, the message spread. The Vex could be beaten. They were powerful, but inflexible, advanced, but arrogant. And most importantly, they had never learned the lesson that every human child knew instinctively. Respect the power of nature, or it will destroy you. "Deploy the pathogen containers," High Commander Drex ordered, his scales dark with determination. "These humans have proven troublesome in direct combat, but no species can evolve resistance to completely foreign diseases." The Vex Bioweapons Division had worked tirelessly, developing viruses and bacteria that should, by all their calculations, devastate the human population. Their delivery systems, silent, drum-like spheres, drifted down through Earth's atmosphere, releasing invisible clouds of engineered pathogens over major population centers. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. "Where are the reports of mass infections?" Drex demanded. "Why aren't their communication systems filled with panic?" On the planet below, Dr. West stood in a hazmat suit, examining samples in what had once been a university laboratory. Around her, a team of epidemiologists and microbiologists worked frantically. "It's remarkable," she said, looking up from her microscope. "The Vex pathogens are sophisticated, but they're encountering something they weren't designed for: human immune response diversity." She displayed a slide showing biological samples. "Humans have fought diseases for our entire existence. Our immune systems are battle-hardened. And more importantly, we're all slightly different. Some people are naturally resistant to what's killing others." A younger scientist nodded. "And we've been developing vaccines and treatments for centuries. The Vex don't seem to understand the concept of medicine. Their biology shows signs of genetic engineering for disease resistance, not natural immunity or medical intervention." Captain Reed, joining by secure video link, looked concerned. "But people are still getting sick, right? We've got reports from several cities." "Yes," Dr. West admitted, "but nothing like what the Vex expected. And we're already isolating their pathogens and developing countermeasures. Our medical infrastructure is damaged but still functioning." What the humans didn't immediately realize, but the Vex were discovering to their horror, was that Earth's biosphere was fighting back in ways neither species had anticipated. On the Vex command ship, the medical bay was overflowing with sick troops. Soldiers who had been on the planet's surface were developing mysterious symptoms: respiratory distress, skin lesions, internal organ failure. "What is happening?" Drex demanded of the chief medical officer. "Our troops are protected against biological contamination." The medical officer's scales had dulled with exhaustion. "Commander, the Earth pathogens are evolving rapidly. They're combining with our engineered organisms and creating hybrid diseases our systems can't recognize." Core, who had been studying Earth's biological systems, finally spoke up. "Earth has billions of years of biological warfare encoded in its simplest organisms. Their microbes compete, adapt, and evolve at rates we've never encountered. And they're everywhere, in the soil, the water, the air." "But our troops are dying from our own bioweapons," protested another officer. "Exactly," said Core. "Our pathogens are being reprogrammed by Earth organisms. They're mutating into forms that target our biology instead of human biology." Back on Earth, Dr. West made a breakthrough. Studying captured Vex biological samples, she discovered something remarkable. "They have no concept of symbiotic relationships," she explained to the Emergency Scientific Council. "In their evolutionary history, organisms only interact through predation or parasitism. The idea that different species could evolve to help each other is completely foreign to them." "How does that help us?" asked a military representative. Dr. West smiled. "Humans host thousands of beneficial bacteria that help us digest food, protect our skin, and even support our immune systems. To the Vex, carrying other organisms inside your body is always harmful. They've engineered themselves to be completely pure, and that's their weakness." Captain Reed saw the opportunity immediately. "So they're vulnerable to the very diversity that makes Earth life so resilient." "Exactly. Their biology is efficient but inflexible. They engineered themselves into an evolutionary corner," Dr. West replied. "And now we know how to exploit it." As Vex forces began withdrawing from Earth's surface to escape the biological nightmare they had unintentionally unleashed, humans started to plan their next move. The Vex had attempted to use Earth's harshness against humanity, not understanding that this harshness had forged humans into the perfect opponents to face them. The Deathworld was teaching the Vex a deadly lesson about the power of adaptability. "I never thought I'd see the stars like this," Captain Reed whispered, gazing through the viewport of the captured Vex cruiser. Behind him, 50 of Earth's best soldiers and scientists prepared for humanity's first mission beyond their solar system. The ship, renamed Defiance, had been one of many abandoned by retreating Vex forces. While the alien fleet regrouped at their nearest outpost, humans worked day and night to understand the alien technology. What would have taken decades in peacetime was accomplished in months through desperate necessity. Navigation systems are responding, reported Lieutenant Fisher from what they had determined was the pilot's station. Her hands moved confidently across alien controls that had been modified with human interfaces. Course to Vex Outpost Sigma locked in. Reed nodded. "Take us out, Lieutenant. Let's show them what happens when you corner humans." The Defiant slipped away from Earth, followed by 6 other captured vessels. Each carried specialized teams. Engineers, soldiers, and scientists, all volunteers for a mission that might be one way. On the Vex outpost, an orbital station around a barren moon, alarms suddenly blared. "Incoming ships detected," announced a Vex operator. "They match our own vessel signatures." The station commander stared in disbelief as the ships approached. Impossible. Those were lost during the Earth campaign. When the truth dawned that humans had not only survived the Vex assault, but had mastered their technology enough to pilot their own ships, panic spread through the station. The Vex had never encountered a species that could adapt so quickly to advanced technology. The battle for the outpost was brief but intense. The Vex, confident in their environmental systems, were unprepared when humans breached their defenses wearing modified Vex armor. "They can't understand how we're surviving here," Dr. West said, monitoring atmospheric readings inside her helmet. The station's artificial gravity was set lower than Earth's, giving the human attackers an unexpected advantage. They moved faster, jumped higher, and hit harder than the Vex had ever seen humans move. The Vex who surrendered were shocked to be taken prisoner rather than eliminated. Among them was a senior analyst named Kor, who requested to speak with the human leader. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Reed asked Kor in a makeshift interrogation room. "That's why you've been studying us so carefully." Kor's eye stalks lowered in what Reed had learned was a gesture of agreement. "Your species is unlike any we've encountered. Most life forms specialize. They become perfectly adapted to specific conditions. But humans, you generalize. You can survive almost anywhere, adapt to almost anything. And now we've adapted to space travel," Reed said, "using your own ships against you. The High Command will never accept defeat," Kor warned. "They will escalate, use planet killers if necessary." Reed leaned forward. "Then help us stop them before that happens. Your empire has subjugated countless species. How many of them are waiting for a chance to fight back?" The information Kor provided was invaluable. The Vex Empire, while vast, was surprisingly fragile. Their rigid hierarchy couldn't adapt quickly to new threats. Their conquered worlds were restless, their forces stretched thin. Within days, the human forces had secured the outpost and were using its communication array to broadcast a message to other worlds under Vex control. "Earth has defeated the Vex. You can too." Meanwhile, Dr. West and her team discovered something shocking in the station's biological research lab. "They've been collecting DNA from every world they conquer," she explained to Reed, showing him the vast database. "They study it to find weaknesses, ways to control or eliminate species they consider threats." "Can we use this information?" Reed asked. Dr. West nodded. "Better. We can share it with all the conquered worlds. The Vex have inadvertently given us the perfect weapon, knowledge of their own biological vulnerabilities." As responses began coming in from other worlds, cautious at first, then increasingly bold, Reed realized they had changed the game completely. The Vex had expected to add another conquered planet to their empire. Instead, they had triggered the beginning of their empire's fall. They never understood what makes Earth special. Reed told his crew as they prepared to make contact with the first alien resistance group. "It's not just that our world is harsh. It's that its harshness taught us to never give up, to always find another way." The counter-invasion had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. High Commander Drex stood before the Supreme Council, his scales faded to a dull gray, the Vex equivalent of exhaustion and defeat. Behind him, the grand strategic display showed the unthinkable. red indicators spreading across the Empire as world after world joined the rebellion sparked by Earth. The situation is beyond containment, Drex admitted, his voice hollow. What began as a simple conquest has become an empire-wide catastrophe. The Supreme Leader, ancient and rarely seen, leaned forward on a hovering platform. Explain how these primitive creatures have done this. They are not what we thought they were, Drex replied. We classified Earth as a death world because of its harsh conditions, but we failed to understand what those conditions created. A species that thrives on adversity. On the human-controlled Vex outpost, now renamed Unity Station, Captain Reed chaired a historic meeting. Around the modified conference chamber sat representatives from 12 formerly subjugated species, each one different from the last. Some insectoid, some reptilian, some with forms humans could barely comprehend. The Vex believed their strength was in uniformity. Reed addressed the gathering. Their troops are identical, their tactics unchanging, their hierarchy rigid. But look around this room. Our strength is in our differences. Core, now officially defected to the Alliance, activated a holographic display showing the Vex homeworld. Their central command is vulnerable. They never expected enemies to reach their core systems, so their defenses face outward, not inward. And their biology is equally vulnerable, added Dr. West. They engineered themselves for efficiency, eliminating what they saw as weaknesses, including the ability to adapt quickly to new threats. The plan they developed was ambitious, not to destroy the Vex, but to force them to recognize a new reality. The coordinated strike would target the Vex Central Command, while encrypted messages would spread to every corner of the Empire, offering freedom to all enslaved worlds. As the Allied fleet, a mixture of captured Vex vessels and ships from newly liberated worlds, approached the Vex homeworld, they faced surprisingly little resistance. Many Vex commanders, seeing the changing tide, chose to stand down rather than fight a losing battle. The Supreme Leader of the Vex received Captain Reed not in a war room, but in a garden, one of the few places on the austere Vex homeworld that showed any appreciation for natural life. You could destroy us, the ancient leader acknowledged. Your alliance now commands more ships than remain loyal to us. Yet you offer terms instead. Reed nodded. Humans learned long ago that extermination is rarely the answer. We fought countless wars against each other, and the best outcomes always came when we found ways to coexist afterward. A curious philosophy for creatures from such a hostile world, the Supreme Leader observed. Perhaps it's because of our hostile world, Reed replied. When you live on a planet that constantly tries to kill you, you learn that adding more violence rarely solves problems. The peace treaty established the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, replacing the Vex Empire. Each world would govern itself, with a council of representatives making decisions that affected the galaxy as a whole. The Vex would retain their homeworld and nearby systems, but their days of conquest were over. As the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, carrying news of their victory, Core approached Reed. Your world will now be known throughout the galaxy, the former Vex analyst said. Not as a death world, but as the birthplace of freedom. We're just happy to have neighbors rather than enemies, Reed replied with a smile. Though I suspect Earth will seem a little smaller now that we have a whole galaxy to explore. Back on Earth, cities began rebuilding. The scars of the Vex invasion would remain for generations, but humanity had gained something incredible in return, knowledge that they were not alone, and that their unique resilience had value beyond their world. Children looked up at the night sky with new understanding. Those distant stars weren't just lights anymore. They were places, with people and histories and futures intertwined with Earth's own. And throughout the galaxy, a new saying spread among spacefaring species: never declare war on a death world. You might just wake up its inhabitants.